Well, good morning and Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, Shabir Bhai, for that very kind and generous welcome. When he says he spoke to me in 2011, I knew a little about Islamic finance. What he failed to tell you is that I knew nothing about Islamic finance, and I decided to take it upon myself to learn and to hopefully deliver what subsequently was delivered in government. What Shabir Bhai also tells you that he's one of the few people in this world who has actually seen me cry. But we'll not go there. I'm sure we'll save that one for the book. But I want to say a few things today, ladies and gentlemen. The topic I was given was what steps should be taken for London and Britain to better connect with its Muslim communities. And I'm not going to speak from an Islamic finance perspective or how I feel this industry should connect. I'm sure you will have your own ideas as to that. I will briefly touch upon it. But I'll speak as a politician and where I feel we have connected, where we've failed, and where we can do things differently. And I think there are a number of principles when you start to connect with your minority communities, and specifically the British Muslim community, which is the community I'll be speaking about today. And the first of those principles is the place of religion in the public sphere. One of the very first speeches I did when I came into government in 2010 was a take on Alistair Campbell's famous words that this government, that they don't do God. And I said this government would do God. And what I meant by that was that the place of religion in the public sphere, a religion as an informer of the debate, should be back on the agenda. I wasn't advocating some sort of theocracy, but what I was saying was that religion has solutions, and therefore they should be seen as an informer of the debate when we are looking for solutions. And nowhere did that ring more true than in the world that we all saw post-2008 in the financial collapse, where we realized that many of the principles that religion offered as a solution in the form of Islamic finance was clearly principles that, if they had been followed, may not have had us all see the consequences, the dire consequences that we did see post-2008. And in many ways, this was brought to the fore again for me this morning. The cab driver who picked me up this morning was French, Algerian French. He was born and raised in France, and he told me that even though he was born and raised in France, he was just still considered to be Algerian. He decided to make Britain his home, to which, of course, I said to him, good choice. And he said that one of the reasons why he'd made Britain his choice, his home of choice, was because he felt that he could be himself. He felt that the concept of religion in the public sphere was something that was much more in tune with natural human instinct, whereas in France it was almost having to be put behind closed doors. So although I feel that compared to certain countries in Europe, and certainly compared to France, religion in the public sphere in Britain is in a much better place, I still feel that as an informer of the debate, much more could be done. The second principle I think I want to touch on is the difference between the reality and myth. And one of the concerns that I have in relation to engagement with British Muslim communities is that much of our engagement is done through a spectrum which is not evidence-based, but is opinion-based. And therefore, when we, for example, talk about issues around the security of Britain and what I see as the securitization of British Muslim communities, we do so on the basis not of even what our own intelligence services are saying, nor even on the basis of data and academic research, but on the basis of popular right-wing opinion. And I think, therefore, again, when we talk about engagement, and it may be something relevant for your industry, let's draw a distinction between the myth and the reality. The third thing that I want to touch upon is the economic case for engagement. I'm sure there are many academics in here who would be able to say that if you were to fully utilize the talent that there is within British Muslim communities, then the knock-on impact on our GDP would be X amount. I'm sure somebody's worked that to figure out. But I also feel that in relation to the engagement of the British Muslim community, that economic test needs to be made, but also needs to go further. If I can try and explain that to you in the realms of Islamic finance, When I first became involved in this in 2011, the Prime Minister, you may recall, went to Malaysia in 2011. He had the pleasure of sitting next to A1 Governor Zeti at dinner, and she basically read the Riot Act to him. And he came back and and I think her words, I'll paraphrase, was something like this: stop talking about Islamic finance. If you're serious about it, put up or shut up. I'm sure she didn't quite put it like that, because Governor Zeti is obviously much more diplomatic than I am. But when the Prime Minister came back, he said, we need to do something about Islamic finance. And I said, well, what's the something? And he said, well, we need to do something about Islamic finance. And that kind of brief conversation led to me sitting down with Shabir Bhai and others who are in this room. And we started to chart what we felt we needed to do and how the development in many ways had stagnated, and what is it that we could put up which would mean that we would be taken seriously. But in those early days, I realized very quickly that there was a distinction between the economic test for developing Islamic finance and the Daily Mail test for developing Islamic finance. And there was an instinctive belief that anything that started with the word Islamic was inherently bad, as if it was some sort of closet jihadi banking, which was going to corrupt what we have in the City of London. And therefore, we needed to be incredibly cautious about how we were going to develop this. What I realized quickly was, tragically, brand Islam was broken, and therefore brand Islamic finance was not easily sellable to the Daily Mail. And therefore, we were starting not from a position of zero, but from a negative position in terms of making the economic case, the obvious principled economic case for why Islamic finance would both be beneficial to banking, but also would be a great business model and decision for Britain to take. And so that's my kind of third point of principle. Do we have the tools and the language to make the strong case, the strong economic case for Islamic finance, which also manages to overcome the Daily Mail test? The fourth issue that I want to touch upon is sincerity and intention. When we started looking at this back in 2011 and 12, I spent a lot of time traveling around countries which had long and deep reputations on Islamic finance. And the one thing that came back consistently was, we don't think you're sincere about this. And when I used to ask and scratch beneath the surface, it was very obvious that our conversation on the sukuk, which had risen and fallen and risen and fallen and been shelved and brought to the fore again, it just hadn't happened. And that because we had raised expectations so many times, our sincerity was being questioned as to whether or not we were genuinely committed to this agenda. So what became apparent, other than the kind of genuine reasons that people at Sultan and others will say why a sukuk was necessary for those in retail banking, but what became apparent was that this was also going to be a flagship moment where we would be able to say, look, we are serious about this, we're planting that flag. And my intention always was that this should be the start of many issuances. I didn't want to say that at the beginning because it would scare everybody, but I always felt that as long as we could get people over that political red line over the first issuance, then I was convinced that thereafter the case would be made, the demand would be huge, which subsequently turned out to be true, and we would be able to see the benefits of further issuance. And therefore, we decided in 2012, when I chaired the Islamic Finance task force, that was the big thing that we needed to focus on. We did. We finally got there. Lots of stories on the way. I mean, probably one of the most interesting one for me was when we'd finally managed to find the asset to which the sukuk would be attached. I'd handed over my department building. We thought, let's just get on with this, anything just to get us over the line. An inquiry came back to say, well, if somebody was to bring in a bacon sandwich for their breakfast into the office in the morning, would that therefore no longer make this building Sharia compliant? At which point I said, let's put in the burger scanners on a morning and make sure everybody's bacon butties are scanned to make sure it's turkey bacon. But I mean, joking aside, it was a pretty crazy uphill task, and there are many people in this room who know the inside track to many of those conversations, and I'm sure we'll make interesting reading one day. But having got beyond that kind of line in relation to Islamic finance, I felt that we also needed to we needed to have an acknowledgement of understanding our British Muslim communities at the same time. And therefore what we did was not just issue the Sukuk, but have an offering in relation to Sharia compliant student loans, Sharia compliant startup loans, and therefore it was part of a much broader package. And that brings me on to my final point. I regularly say, people say, well, how do you survive in politics? How do you make sure that the decisions that you're making are right? Ideologically, you can be from a whole spectrum of political positions. So what is the one rule that you can apply across those spectrum of political positions, which allows you to judge whether the positions you're taking are the right positions? And I always say there are two very simple tests, and if you filter them through those tests, you should be fine. And that is say what you believe and do what you say. They're pretty simple rules. But interestingly, in politics, are quite conflicted. Politicians don't always say what they believe, and they don't necessarily do what they say. But I think when it comes to the issue of Islamic finance, we said we believed in this as a concept. We believed in the advantage of this particular sector to London and the City of London, but also more broadly in terms of our position, our financial positioning in the world. We did what we said by issuing and by making the other package that I've just discussed, mentioned around that. But where do we go from here? And I hope one of the things that can come out of this conference is really how do we once more put our foot on the accelerator and push government to carry on with this agenda. I used to chair a group called the Global Islamic Finance and Investment Group before I left government. It was a fantastic group of some great professionals from around the world. We really did have the creme de la creme of some of the thinkers, the thought leaders on this area. It provided London an opportunity to step away from sometimes some of those wranglings between, say, Malaysia and the Arab world and Turkey and other places. It was actually a kind of an independent place for some of that thought leadership. And London, with its reputation, obviously, was respected in being able to host that group. That has come to a bit of a staggering halt. And I think one of the things that you should come out of this conference would be, what are the next asks of government? Who's the Sayeeda in government who you need to latch onto? And how do you get her or him to believe, like you got me to believe, and once again start to deliver for this industry? Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Sayeeda, for those wonderful words and also sharing a bit of your journey on Islamic finance. Really appreciate that. I also want to say thank you on behalf of Nora, who's not here and you know her, who I think initially said when we put this day aside, we've got to get Sayeeda to speak. So I'm very pleased you managed to make the time. And I know you're jetting off somewhere else for another conference, is it? So we're going to let you go in a few minutes, but thank you for giving us some time for a Q&A. So we're very pleased that Baroness Warsi has agreed to take a few questions before we will excuse her this morning. Can I open the floor for any questions? And please make sure it's a question rather than a monologue. If you have anything you want to discuss regarding Islamic finance or anything that Baroness Warsi has spoken about today, please. Do remember that we're on live podcast here, and I don't know how many people are listening in, or conversations will be recorded and listened to as well.
Now you tell me.
that was planned, yes. Mushtaq, first question to you. Okay, there's a microphone coming, all right.
Okay, thank you. Since you were the last, if you like, the advocate for Islamic finance in the government, who would be your choice to take this forward, the next Sayeeda? I mean, I've got my own choices, but or suggestions, but you know your colleagues much better than we do. So who do you think would do that the best?
Okay. I think instinctively I would go with Sajid. simply because he's the business secretary, he has history in this area. He was really helpful and useful at the time of the first issuance because he had been involved in an issuance in Germany, in one of the provinces rather than at a state level. And because as biz secretary, it should really kind of be something that he should be looking at anyway. He's got experience in the Treasury. And like I said, he was there when we did the first issuance. So there would be a natural kind of carry-on. And then he could delegate really the task of some of the more overseas stuff to potentially somebody like Hugo Swire in the Foreign Office. Again, Hugo is a great Arabist, understands the Muslim world well, and has an affinity as well. So I think between Sajid and Hugo, that would be the team that I would really pitch for. And Hugo, I think, has still got the brief, the prosperity brief in the FCO. So again, there'd be a natural kind of alignment there.
Chance that you might come back one day?
No. Well, no. It's probably the easiest way of saying it.
Thank you for that, Baroness Warsi. Got one question behind you, Iqbal, and then come back to you.
Just on the point of Muslim communities, how could Islamic finance be something that is experienced by Muslim communities in Britain as opposed to this irrelevant industry that is very lucrative, but we, as one of the poorest faith communities in Britain, don't feel the effect of something that is massive, so to speak? How could the government, or how could we, as people interested in Islamic finance, create that platform?
I think what was obvious to me when we were looking at the issue of finance, Islamic finance, was that the British market, which instinctively people think is going to be British Muslims, wasn't huge and wasn't particularly interested. And I think we have to be honest about that. Ultimately, if you can't have so many branches on the high street, you can't get internet banking, you can't get the whole spectrum of products that you would like, then most people will probably vote with their economic head rather than their religious head. That's not that's human nature. That's not a kind of a criticism of the British Muslim community in any way. There is a very small minority for whom their religious principles and values override all economic decisions, and they will go with Islamic finance products even if they happen not to be the sharpest, finest product on the market. And therefore, I think we need to think about this in a different way. One of the things we were in the middle of organising before I left, was a hackathon where we were going to bring together some of the kind of greatest nerds and thinkers on Islamic finance together into London, put them in the room for 24 hours, feed them lots of sugar, and just let them think of the most amazing ideas that they could do in terms of product and make them as crazy as possible. And we just thought this 24-hour, and that could be something you guys could revisit, a 24-hour hackathon in London with the brightest brains just bouncing off each other, but literally no sleep, 24 hours. And so and I think if we were to get the real plethora of products out there, I think the British Muslim community would, one, get interested, but secondly, you would start to tap into the non-Muslim market, which if you look in countries like Malaysia and other places, there's been real success in the non-Muslim community taking up Islamic finance. And ultimately, that's where I think your broadest market would be.
Okay.
In the UK.
Here with Iqbal and then to Siraj.
Sayeeda, thank you for those insightful comments, I would say. You know that since the financial crisis, there has been a lot of new thinking in economics on the role of equity as opposed to debt. This is where we get closer to the principles of Islamic finance. We have some very good buy-in on these things from ex-FSA chairman, Lord Adair Turner, people like John Kay, who is a professor of finance at LSE, and so on. And I think that is something which we can develop to link to the wider community on the principles rather than pedal on the brand Islam, as you call it. Maybe some suggestions on the kind of people in government who might warm up to that, apart from the others who will warm up to the specific agenda?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And again, one of the papers that was on the table at the Global Islamic Finance and Investment Group was, how do you brand this without the, sadly, the tarnish of the brand Islam? And we were looking at how we got a straightforward finance public relations company and got them to come back with some ideas. And I completely agree with you that ultimately it's not about the name. In fact, there are many Muslim countries around the world who don't refer to it as Islamic finance. So it's not so much about the name, it's about the core principles. And if we can go back to focusing on them, then that would be a much stronger argument to make. If you were to do that in government, I would say probably the most interesting person to do that with would be Oliver Letwin. He understands this world, and he's a complete nerd, and he'd love this kind of the kind of slightly abstract discussions on this. Who else? I mean, probably somebody like Andrea Leadsom would be another alternative to have these discussions. Maybe Francis Maud. So he would be quite an interesting, and again, he's quite open to those ideas. But it's about you guys making the case. It was easier for you to make the case with me because I was already bought into this. You're now having to make the case from scratch. And I think the biggest challenge for you is going to be finding the space in their mind and their diary for them to think, because that's the biggest challenge in politics. You just get into this wheel. And so I'm not sure I'm absolutely convinced it's not malicious. It's just not a priority.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Siraj?
Thank you, Baroness, for being Sayeeda and all that you've done and doing for us. In a brief conversation, you talked about Islamic finance also being about human rights. I wonder if you can elaborate on that, because we're looking at ways in which we can not only make a business case for Islamic finance, but also on a variety of fronts. Islamic finance for development, Islamic finance in terms of financial inclusion and reaching the 72% of Muslims worldwide who don't have access to conventional finance. So I'm looking forward to hearing how we can broaden the scope of what you're going to do here.
This was, ladies and gentlemen, a conversation Siraj and I had as we came in, and he said, I'm now doing this in Islamic finance. I used to do human rights. And I said, well, actually, Islamic finance is about human rights. The two bits of your life are really intertwined. And yes, because look, ultimately, again, if I can make it quite personal, I always say principles are always great if you do them on a full stomach. It's always easy to be quite principled if you know that the principal position you're about to take means the bread off your table is not going to be taken. And therefore, the best way to empower somebody is to give them financial standing, a bank account, the ability not to be in debt. I mean, I think loan sharks are an abuse of somebody's human rights. It's about putting them in a position where they can no longer function in the normal way that people would want to function. Huge indebtedness has seen how people's lives spiral out of control. So instinctively, providing people with a stable, fair, principled form of banking and a support network when they borrow has got to be a human rights issue. And that's why I think, it is about, you'll remember the debate about GDP versus general well-being. There is a real debate about just the bottom line or the kind of holistic nature of the way we earn and the way we bank. And the general well-being debate is something that I certainly think as an Islamic finance industry you should look at, and look at how you add value to the financial experience.
Okay. Wonderful, thank you. I've got time for one, maybe two quick questions. We're almost at 10:30. There's a gentleman here and one there. This is the last two. You okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Okay, my name is Asif Zaman, and I've come here from Cardiff Metropolitan University. I've been in the Islamic finance teaching arena basically for almost 2, 3, 4 years. And I also have a sales background. I think as far as getting people interested, I mean, this is not an issue as far as I'm concerned, because if you put any sales team, they could make anyone interested in any type of any finance. The issue comes in that basically, how shall we promote Islamic finance? Because I can talk to anyone and make them interested in Islamic finance, but then basically they cannot find the product they need now because they are interested now in Islamic finance. So the base order of promotion, are we talking about building the talent, building the product, building the industry? Basically, what is the order? Because people generally, and if I speak on behalf of the Muslim community, if they are interested, they cannot find the products. So, how shall we do this? I just wanted to have your insight.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in terms of raising awareness, I think it's already there. I think the awareness of, I think what we have, as a community, what you've managed to do over the last 10 years is really bring this further and further up the agenda. And it's much more in the national conscience than it has been, I suppose, before. But ultimately, I think it comes back down to the products. If the products are there, people will buy them. Now, people providing those products could say, well, if the demand was there, the product would get better. So it is a catch-22 situation. But then it depends on how serious people are in investing in the concept of Islamic finance. And of course, some of that is going to be loss-leading products. So, are we brave enough to make those decisions? You see, one of the areas where I think Islamic finance absolutely needs to play its part, and it's, Sultan and others will say I bang on about this all the time. I want the Islamic finance community to be the largest funders of, completely had a blank moment, the community, no, not crowdfunding. No, it's not even impact investing. It's the small lenders on the ground that you have.
Micro lenders.
Credit unions. Right, so I was going to see now what credit unions. So I actually want the Islamic finance community to be the biggest source of the credit union movement back in the United Kingdom. It's something instinctively British, and it's something which could do with the boost, and it's where you would hit the most marginalised economic part of Britain. And it's not Muslim, actually. It's predominantly a non-Muslim community.
Thank you, Sayeeda. Actually, this will be picked up in the second plenary as well with the panelists that Mushtaq is sharing on that. Okay, last question to the gentleman there.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks very much, Sayeeda Warsi, for your time and your insightful speech. My point has been touched on by several people here in terms of how do we get Islamic finance out to the masses in terms of not just Muslims here. And the point that the elder gentleman made about the debt versus equity principle, the point that you made about the Daily Mail being anti-brand Islam. So a thing that I thought about during the time when the Sukuk market in the UK was seen to be the next best thing since sliced bread, then it died, then it came up again, was that to brand maybe is Islamic finance as ethical finance, but still keep the core principles whereby the risk element is shared and where banks don't get the biggest slice of the cake, where they're not actually taking the unequal size of the risk. I just want to see what your insight is.
I think it probably goes back to the answer that I gave earlier. This was one of the work streams of the Global Islamic Finance and Investment Group. It was looking at how we look at rebranding this to make it more attractive to a broader audience, but not just a broader audience within the United Kingdom, but to a broader Western audience as well. I mean, the people on the group were from all across the world. So again, I think if you can get government interested in this again, and you can get them to take that group seriously, because there were some fantastic people on there who, busy people who didn't need to give up their time to be on that group. And I just feel that we need, we have a window of opportunity after which I think we will lose the goodwill of many of these people who've given their time and energy, and that was exactly the kind of thing they were looking at.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for your questions and your attention as well, but mainly, Baroness Warsi, I want to say thank you to you for making the time this morning. It's absolutely a pleasure to have you here with us, and we're hoping that this is the first of a number of series of conversations that UEL can host. I should have said actually in the introduction that you also have a new post at the University of Bolton as Vice Chancellor?
Pro-Vice Chancellor.
Pro-Vice Chancellor. So I hope that's going to help one of the initiatives we would like to sponsor from UEL to bring all the academic institutions together on the subject of Islamic finance. So hopefully you'll be supportive of us.
We have a Centre for Islamic Studies
You
there,
do,
so
yes.
we'll give you a run for your money, Siraj.
Thank you very much. Please, a large, warm round of applause. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand over to